Well, hello and welcome to the Friday the 13th edition of the Low-Code Campfire for May 13. This is episode 50. I came up with this wonderful title, the Big 50, and I'm sure in a couple of weeks we'll celebrate that we got 50, we're up to 52 episodes of Low-Code Campfire. But welcome. Introduce myself. My name is Dale Warner. I am the head of support for Plantain App and your host today. This is an event we do every week. It's in a meeting format where we just get together and talk about what's going on in your setup, or perhaps in techniques, challenges, experiences, the things that are going on that are new in Plantain App. So the previous editions are all out on YouTube, youtube.com/plantainapp. So jump in and subscribe to that. We run a pretty loose agenda because it's just a rolling conversation. We'll do introductions for anybody that's new to the group. And then aside from that, we'll do first call and look at contributions to our community website. We'll take us wherever you want to go. After an hour or so, or when things get quiet, we'll go into our Afterglow segment. We'll turn off the recording and just have a chat. So participate, jump in, show and tell, do something. Here we go. Oh yes, very important. If you've got noise going on behind you, please mute. And you can submit your questions and topics in advance using the link that's in your email every time, or this link. And we love the feedback. With that, good morning, hello.
Good morning, Dale.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Looks like the full set of regulars today, so nobody new to the group. So what's going on? Anybody with an interesting project or a problem to deal with?
I've got a bit of an issue. I wanted to know how to refresh the cache files without a person having to go and refresh on their browser. So it's like an automatic thing. Is it just a server setting? Is there some other script that's got to be run? Because I've got this mobile app with using this web view, and if I change the CSS or the script files, it won't update on the mobile phone unless I uninstall and reinstall it.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's that increase the server version, but I tried doing that and it didn't seem to work.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction that I was going. If the browser senses that the files in question are new, then it's going to force it to refresh. It will not pull it from the cache. So if you're where you include the CSS, and I haven't done this, I'm just kind of speaking theoretically, hopefully somebody else has done it. But where you load the CSS, if you include the version number as part of that, and I assume there's a token for that, so ampersand VER equals something, that when the version number gets incremented, the browser will detect it as a changed file and pull it. But that's, like I said, that's a theoretical approach.
But how do you change the skin.css and update, put that sort of version part on that one?
Yeah, so are you using your own custom theme?
Yes.
All right, so I mean, if you edit the theme files, you should be able to make a change to where the CSS gets loaded.
It still uses the skin for part of it. So I'd have to move most of the CSS out of the skin file and have a custom file, so I could do that, I would gather.
Oh, you're saying the theme itself has a lot of CSS in it that isn't part of a CSS file.
Yep.
Yeah, so the CSS wouldn't be considered separate. Anyone else with ideas?
because there's JavaScript files that go with that as well.
Isn't there a new action for clearing the cache just introduced recently? I'm trying to remember where I saw that.
Is that for I think that's for clearing a user cache. This is for the browser. So I can update if I do an update.
That actually won't clear the cache from a browser.
So there's a couple people that came late to the party. I'm just going to repeat the question. It's about how to clear the browser cache when your CSS changes, and looking for a way to do that automatically. And so far we're coming up blank. Have you, Anthony, have you researched it in terms of like individual browsers to see if there's a
I looked up some things where you're running a you're either storing something in local storage to say what version you're at, and then in your header you're increasing a version and it's checking to see, and it's causing a page reload.
Mm-hmm.
I think I tried to do that once and it just kept spinning around. It just locked up the page. So I think we've got to try and find a better one for it.
Is this sorry, I came in late, so I'm one of the people catching up. Is this a CSS file that exists elsewhere that you're referencing, or is this CSS code that you're putting directly into the page?
No, it's a part of it's the normal skin.css. And if I'm making changes to that, I can refresh it on my browser, but on a mobile device, I wanted to be able to, if I've changed it there, the device would recognize that it's actually changed and automatically update itself.
Yeah, the only way that I know of doing something like that would be the call to whatever the CSS is to have that, question mark version, and then something there that if, let's say for argument's sake, you put the current date time in that version, it's always going to refresh that file. It won't allow cache to, pull it because the version is always going to be updated. Yep. But that would mean changing the reference to that CSS file.
Yep, and if that CSS file, I mean, you might, for example, since you say you have some CSS within the skin itself, perhaps you could move it or override it so that it is part of a file that gets loaded, that you could then employ that technique.
Yeah, it's definitely, I can definitely do that.
Yeah,
and to check out the chat window too, I
just saw that now.
Yeah, that's there's a small number of possible solutions on that page.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it far better when we have a definitive answer. Yeah, just do this and it's fine. But
yeah, don't we all?
Yeah, because I just tried the simple increase the version, then I checked the app that I've got developed for it, and it didn't refresh. Still was using the old one.
Yeah.
I like the idea that Dale said. I mean, if you need certain CSS, even if it already exists in the skin, if you just use the same CSS and put it into a file to override that CSS, that other CSS, then let's say, well, at least in the respect of an action form, you could do the load external files and then put in that version as part of the file information, I believe. Might be able to do that. I'm not 100% sure on whether it accepts that version code, but that might be another way. And then use a GUID. GUID is supposed to always be unique every single time you generate it. You don't even have to use a date time.
Well, and I don't think you necessarily want to force. You go back to the original, the fact that DNN supports versioning, or there's other ways to do it, but I don't think you necessarily need to force it to happen every time. If you're
No, it's not every time. It's more of if I've done an upgrade,
Yep.
Or I've fixed something up within JavaScript or with Skin, so that someone who's using a mobile device, they don't have to go, oh, how do I refresh it? Do I have to unload, reload? It just needs to be seamless for a user.
Sure.
I mean, at that point, it's a little more extra work, but the file itself that you're referencing, if you put a version number as part of the file name,
Yep.
then when you make a change, update the file name, and
Yep.
then update in your form the file reference. And at that point, they're going to get the new version.
Yep.
Yep, you just have to have it outside of the skin so that it forces it to load.
Most of the things have got a reference within the Skin, where I could put a version code onto it,
Mm-hmm.
and then just update the actual Skin file. And probably just do the refresh like a refresh of the server.
Yeah, now I'm wondering, is anybody familiar with the where we started out with the versioning, where you can increase the version with .NET Nuke, and how to get that? Is that a token? I was just curious.
I've done that before with the token for generating a random number. And I string about 4 or 5 of them together.
Yeah.
Question mark, var equals random, 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 random.
Okay, well, that's a couple of ideas, and I see Matthew has also posted another version of how to, so maybe there's something between those 2 articles. If you do find something, I think it'd be an interesting topic to bring back.
Oh, if I get something to solve it, I'll definitely post it up.
Perfect. All right, what else? So this is a little bit of an offline conversation. Matthew, did you get where you were going yesterday?
Yes, short answer, yes. The part of it that we worked on. And again, very, very grateful for your help, Dale. Sometimes it definitely takes another set of eyes to look at something. Much appreciated. So yeah, I was able to get it sorted. I still have more work to do with respect to some of the other like the additional comments and some of the other kind of other fields that go along with it, but I should be able to get that sorted here shortly.
Good. Just a kind of a brief summary. Matthew has a great application that he's, but it's all built on dynamic forms. So you have dynamic questions, and then you've got to parse out the dynamic answers. And so the technique for how do I know what's on the form now when I hit submit, and what do I do with it, that whole topic. And I think we have an example of that in the Campfire, actually. Let me take a look at that. But it's kind of an advanced technique, and if you're using it, you just kind of have to understand, oops, that's the wrong spot, but we'll get there. Yeah, dynamic questions and answers. So nice example of how to do that kind of a technique. I wonder how good this. Yep. So depending on, so this form is dynamic. You can get different questions out of the same. So this is city and PIN and whatever, and then this is contact info kind of questions. And we're using this field that would typically be hidden, this is the JSON or list that was used to build this form. And on the other side, once you click save, there's logic to use this same JSON to extract it out. So understanding how to build a dynamic form and then pull it off is kind of an interesting topic. And it can get a little bit hair pulling. So
Yeah, one just comment for everybody. If you ever go to do this, a couple of things. The field code itself and the dynamic form setup has to cannot begin with a number, has to begin with something, a letter. And Ben, you had suggested some essentially way to concatenate a couple of different things in the field ID to make it unique. And I had already tried that. And because of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, that piece of it wouldn't work. What I had to do with Dale's keen observation is essentially go one layer higher into the SQL to essentially create a dynamic field ID on the fly. Whereas this example, these field IDs, you'll see the field code home phone, that's static in the database. Whereas in this case, I had to basically create a dynamic field name, field code in this case, on the fly. So that's why I had to go back into the SQL when I was actually creating the query to develop the list for the dynamic form and make that ID value be prepended with some characters. So it was always unique and always generated on the fly. So it's interesting.
Yep, fields. I mean, within fields do have to be non-numeric, and that's one challenge. So you had a couple of challenges to overcome there. And anyway, very interesting application, quite complex, and so glad to hear it's making progress. Any other first call kinds of things? Okay, so Wednesday, we got Costin. We did Docker. Did anybody get a look at that and have any interest? Any comments you wanted to make about Docker? Did anybody try it?
I showed up a little bit late, and I kind of missed the gist of what's going on. Could you give me a brief, high-level overview of what Docker's for?
Sure. So this is going to be another way to deploy plant an app that the traditional way is you have to have a lot of setup before you can start installing our product. There's a Windows system with IIS and DNN installed, and then you install our module, and then you have to place it on a page. And so you have all these steps that are involved before you get it up, and then you get into licensing and configuring and building your app. What Costin showed was that if you use Docker, it's a type of virtualization. I'm probably going to butcher this a little bit, but it's a type of virtualization so that different things can run in containers. And so he has provided through a GitHub repository a Docker image. And when you run the Docker image, it builds two containers by default, one for your SQL Server Express and one for the DNN. And the DNN is all configured up to version. It has Plantain App 1.20 on it. It has whatever the current DNN is. And so, yes, you have to, instead of installing IIS, you install Docker and then run this script. And after a while, the next thing that happens is you have access to Plankton app. You have access to the website. It comes up asking for license information. You can sign in and start a trial. And so it just greatly simplifies the deployment. But we're also seeing, and some of the questions that we got on Wednesday also kind of points to some of the other things that you can do with it. Because these are containers that are running, you could, for example, develop on your local system and have containers that have SQL and your DNN instance that we set up, and then port those to a production system, and or move them to a different server and still continue to run them under Docker. So it adds a level of portability. And then afterwards, we always have a after cafe meeting where we talk about what we did and what's next. And so I don't want to get too far ahead, but at some point we're going to come back and talk about the virtualization and the ability to scale up an app so that you can have, for example, as your user count goes way high, that you have the ability to scale the app up through Docker. So, and there's really no danger of me going too far ahead, because that's really all I know.
Can I kind of jump in or ask a
Please.
question regarding that? Because Docker is completely new to me. That was like my big question when it was first brought up, is like, what is Docker? Like, how does this relate? I'm glad to hear that it is, at least for the foreseeable future, not going to be the only way of installing. The only reason I say that is because Docker seems great for a development environment, especially something local that you're running on your local machine. But it also locks you out of IIS. And that, at least in my particular case, is problematic, because I need to be able to, maybe for argument's sake, add a domain name, change a domain name, whatever. You wouldn't be able to do that with Docker, because it won't let you get into the IIS settings. So you can't do new bindings or anything of that nature, at least not easily from what I understood. It may be a situation where you have to tweak the config file or something like that, so there are certain things, like not being able to access IIS is kind of like, I hear that and I'm like, I don't know if I like that idea.
And we're at the edge of my knowledge on that one, so I don't know. It would seem like there's got to be a way to do that, but it sounds like it's going to be different. Yeah.
Hey, as long as we have both options, I'm cool.
So Ben, did you pick up that fact during the presentation? Is that where you heard that locking out of IIS?
Yes, yeah. He basically flat out said it in the meeting, that there's like no RDP or anything to the container. So you do not have access to IIS directly. You wouldn't be able to manipulate it, open up IIS, nothing, because the Docker basically works as IIS and it manages everything itself. So whatever options you have available to you through the setup scripts, if they're able to be, tweaked on the fly, I guess you would have to shut down your container temporarily, make those changes, and then start it up again so that it reads the new settings, whatever it be. But if you have access to those settings that way, that might be a way of doing it, but it's not a situation where what we're used to, like you can open up IIS, right click on a website, go to bindings, make changes, change your IP. It's not that easy. It's a little bit more involved because you have to work through what Docker allows you to do.
Now,
So
is
it
that
is
the-
virtualization, but it's not, don't think it's like RDP, because it's not. You don't have a desktop that you can access.
Was that for the new website that you're creating, or is that take over the entire IIS?
From my understanding, it's, I guess you could I'm assuming you could potentially have both running side by side. So you could have IIS with whatever websites you have already designed and then start up Docker separately.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all.
You know, so they can work in tandem on the same machine. But typically, from my understanding, Docker is basically spinning up new systems
Hello,
for the most
everyone.
part.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
I am Costin. It's nice to be here. I it seems I joined at the right time. Sorry for being late. I had some things to take care of. Yeah, I noticed you were talking about Docker and running in parallel with IIS. Yes, it should work because they are the only thing that can conflict are the ports. As long as you set different port in the IIS containers, they should be running side by side without any problems. But of course, on Windows, Docker is still evolving, and you might have some issues here and there sometimes, and there seems to be occasionally random, especially on personal computers, because like always, personal computers are many things installed and may conflict with a lot of things. On servers, it is more stable from my experience and from my testing. So the short answer is yes, it should be running side by side with IIS. I hope
If I can ask to elaborate on one thing, you said as long as they use different ports, which I totally understand. What about people who aren't using port numbers and instead are using host names?
Even host names should run on ports. I mean, a host name is a replacement for the IP exactly. But if you have an IIS with a site with a host name on port 80 by default or 443 for CCL, you cannot run Docker on the same ports, even if you are using host names.
Okay, so in order to use Docker, you have to use ports. You can't not use ports. So that's a limitation as opposed to using IIS.
Yes. Unfortunately, this is the thing I discovered in Docker. The only tie between the external, the part of Docker, I mean the internet, your own host, and the container image inside is the port. It does not support, like IIS does, host name separation between multiple sites. That is a different thing, and this is possible on Linux containers, but Plant and App does not run yet in Linux. There are some things in Linux that you can do with a proxy. It's more complicated. I've read about that. I tried to make it work, but it doesn't for now. On Windows containers, it's a bit limited on that. This is why I recommend it for development and trial purposes for now.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that easily for development because that's not a big deal having to type in port numbers and whatnot. But I can't see, especially if you have one server with multiple websites, that yes, they're all on the same server, the same IP. They just have different host names. They're all on port 80. I can't see how this is going to function correctly, at least right now in its current iteration.
Yes, you are right here. Currently, it won't run. It will only run a single container, a single Docker, and the other sites in IIS should be on different port.
So, Costin, first of all, thank you for stopping by. I've been telling him he would be a rock star if he ever dropped by with this group. It's a great chance to get your questions answered. Would it be fair to say that we're early in the Docker journey? We're still.
Yes, these are our first steps in the Docker journey. The plans for the future in the next months or year or so would be to get slowly to .NET Core, to migrate slowly to .NET Core. Once we are there, we can run on Linux as well, and Docker on Linux runs much better and much reliable. And like I said previously, then you can have multiple Dockers with different host names, and you can separate them only by host name. But
Okay.
short answer is yes, we are planning. These are the first steps.
And just out of curiosity, are we implementing this internally in our development scenario, and is it making any difference?
Yes, currently we are trying to implement it like exactly like you said on our developers' computers. Myself, for example, I have used it for the last feature I developed a month or two ago. The one about updating the DNN platform. It was developed entirely in Docker. I mean, when the site was running in Docker, and it did not slow me down when compared to the classic way of hosting in IIS. So yes, this is part of our journey to use it internally more and more, so we can find any issue and prevent it and fix it if it's the case, and update it accordingly.
So I was just going to give a quick. I had a partially a start. Let's say I took a start at trying to do Docker because I wanted to make sure I was able to understand this, and so I ran through the steps that Costine provided from Wednesday. And on that, one of the things that we learned is that case matters. There's a spot in there where it says when you're running a Windows version that you have to have 21H2. So of course I typed 21 big H2 and it blew up. Yeah. And so luckily I have Costine on Teams and I got a quick answer, try a small H, and man, that worked. So then the next thing is that there's a step where when you've got Docker running, you have to find it in the taskbar and make sure by default, I think it came into Linux containers and I had to switch it to Windows containers in order to run. So that's as far as I am now. I don't have it running yet, but it's there to try, and I hopefully have it.
Yes, in the documentation provided, I think they mention about the switch on Windows containers. I mean, the documentation from Microsoft. They might mention about this at some point. If not, it's good to mention, and I will try to update that the tutorial on the GitHub to better explain this.
Yeah, and I think part of this is, I mean, I'm freely admitting I'm a newbie in this. So this is the documentation that we had, and it said 21H2, and I did it wrong. And I just realize, the fact that somebody who might have been here before would know exactly what to do, but I didn't. So, yep, anything we can do to improve the documentation would be good. Jim, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, the question that I had from Wednesday that I couldn't type in the chat clearly enough. So if we take our production system, copy it to Docker, open it in Docker and run it and edit it, when we copy files back or we install those back to the production system, those files are in production and now accessible from IIS. We could shut Docker down and the files will remain in the operating system. So is this a way of doing a deployment also?
Yes, basically what you want to do is to take the files and the database from the production and use it in a Docker to further develop it or work on it, correctly?
Correct.
Okay, that is possible, because this is why we are using the persistence of the files on disk. So yes, you can do that. To be more simple for you, you can install Docker, run the first command with -start, so it will create your DB folder and VVV root folder. And then you can delete the files inside. You copy your production files and database files. But the database files should be the MDF and the LDF files as well. Also, after this step, you should go to .env file and update the last line with the attached DBs. This will tell the SQL Docker to attach the plant and app database, in this case, with the name plant and app. Then you specify the DB files. In the DB files, you only need to modify the name for the MDF and LDF. Do not change the first part, C DB files. Only that part you need to modify to respect your files for that. And then you should be fine to attach your own site. This, for example, this is how I migrated my local instance for development. I had one already on IIS, and then I copied it. I attached it using the steps I've just told, and it was working just fine.
Now, once you made your changes, though, in your Docker environment, how did you get them back to your other environment?
Once you've made them, then you should stop Docker. Do not use the permanently remove or that. Use just stop. So it will be turned off. Then simply copy back the files. I mean, copy the content of VVV root and then the DB files. When you copy MDF and LDF back to SQL Server, you might need to detach that one. I mean, the production one, first detach it, and then reattach the new files from the SQL Server. If needed, we might provide some guidance here. I mean, it is a fair case, and most probably it's the best way to use it right now. So I will try to make some steps for that.
Okay.
So Jim, in your circumstance, if you take the database, take a copy of it and work on it locally, your data isn't being stored in your database. The production data isn't being stored in the database, right?
Correct. I mean, I have plant and app tables that have production database and user tables, you know, user logons and things like that in that I would have to reconcile. I know Jim Everett had some method he uses for doing that with his thousands of users that he's got. And
Jim was talking about that last week. I think he's avoiding actually relying on users, which is one way.
Right. And that, so, I mean, I would have to figure out, but that part of the problem is the same if I make a copy of the database in any method over and back, how to reconcile the two. What I saw from the Docker scripting was, okay, I could build a script once and run that to make a copy of my production system when I need it to go in and test tweaks and skins and, you know, Bootstrap 5 versus 3 would have been a lot easier on a Docker container, you know, from what I was thinking.
Cool. Any other questions about Docker while we still have Costin available?
Excuse me?
No, I was just seeing if anybody else had any more questions for you, Costin. It sounds like something we'll be returning to from time to time as you advance this. And I was mentioning that you were also thinking in terms of eventually presenting how to scale up for larger applications, right?
Yes, that will be a subject, an idea for the future to present.
Yep, not trying to put you in a corner today, just trying to whet the appetite and let people know kind of why we're doing this, that it ultimately will provide some other benefits.
Yes. Plantain app in DNN 9.10.2 version offers some features for scaling up horizontally, meaning you launch more instances, and they have some mechanism for synchronization for community as well now. Before 9.6.1, I think that mechanism was available only for the enterprise edition for Evoke.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps us a lot. And yeah, I plan to improve it a little and make it more reliable so we can demonstrate how to properly scale up using Docker.
Excellent.
Is the .NET Core, when future, is that also part of the DNN roadmap, that at some point there's a version that will require .NET Core?
My understanding is it's not on their roadmap, or it's not officially yet.
Yeah, officially it's not on their roadmap. I think they're working towards it. But we need to go to .NET Core probably sooner than the DNN release. But this is a thing we will need to think through. It involves a lot of work behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So if Plantain app goes to .NET Core, but it's running on top of DNN, you'll have two sites, or what's the, at least the thought?
I'm
No,
pretty sure it's
no.
probably too early to say, isn't it? We don't. I think we're still formulating our plans how that's going to happen.
Yes, exactly. It will be probably step by step first, but the ultimate target will be to have a whole app on .NET Core. But it's not on an official roadmap for now. It's still at a discussion level and brainstorming on it. We know we want to get there. We don't know exactly when.
Good. Okay. I'm going to move on to. There was a totally different topic, and Matthew, I hope you saw that that I kind of took your suggestion. Is Matthew still with us? Yes. That I took your suggestion and spent some time talking about Git, but the idea was about keeping some basics going. Not just dealing with, sometimes we get off into technical, whether it was .NET Core or, event-driven architecture or whatever. We get into some pretty high-level stuff, and then, so there's the idea of back to basics. So I know I got a couple of good comments just on spending some time with Git this week, and with that, I'd be happy we can take some time to open the product and get into anything else that makes sense to you. The group.
Yeah, so for maybe a little additional background, there are things inside of, in this case, tokens, that they have the power to do an enormous amount of things, but they, understandably, the documentation can tend to lag behind. And so with the Campfire, the contributions in Campfire, they've been great examples all along. For instance, we just talked about the dynamic containers. So along those lines, kind of go through some of the core tokens that may not be as well, either as well understood, used, documented, but have got some tremendous potential to, get you out of a jam. So, or enhance some capability that you might be attempting to implement. So that was the thought process behind it.
Mm-hmm. So, did you get something specifically? I did get and get or session. Did you get something out of that?
Are you asking me, Dale?
Yeah, sure. Anyone?
No, I was looking at it because I was trying to solve, I forgot which problem I was trying to solve, and trying to understand if that would have any impact. And then I saw it, actually, I think I saw it being used in the users table that gets built when you click on the users under, under this menu, getting started. You can see an example of, in this case, the get. I think get deleted equals 0 or something like that. I just wanted to understand, like, what is that? How is it used, and so on and so forth. And then also, for instance, at the key as exists in get URL parameters, and then bind request query string token. What are the details on that? How do you make sense of that if you're new to that particular thing?
Yep. So, as I said privately to you yesterday, that there are areas where our documentation could probably use some improvement. So, and for anyone who was not there, this one is just retrieving things off of the command line, as in A equals 1, 2, 3. You could use get:(A) to retrieve a value off the URL. Yep. And then in conjunction with the session one, you can or the cookie one, you can store it and retrieve it. And it's kind of a nice way to persist the information. On the comments, there's one that might be interesting to take a look at. David Osborne says he's been blogging about some of the features and Razor tokens. So that might be an interesting one for you to grab the link and take a look at that one. So as far as our core tokens, is there and this is open to anyone here, is there any one of these that you'd like to see me dive into a little bit in future episodes, or things that you think we don't highlight enough in either this meeting or cafe?
Well, there's some in there for me that seem to be duplicates of others. And it's like, I'm not savvy enough sometimes to go, okay, they're like context items and HTTP context items seem to have the same description, and I don't know if they're really the same thing, or if they're in just different syntax or history. Or
that is a great question, and I don't know the answer. If I see Bogdan is monitoring, and if he happens to know the answer and wants to jump in and save me, that would be great.
Sure. So what is the question? What is this about?
Sure. We've got core tokens, context items, and HTTP context items. And we're trying to figure out what the difference, whether these are duplicates or...
Looks like a duplicate, yeah. And basically there is another storage in ASP.NET, which happens per request. So it's useful, for example, I mean, in plant an app in the business logic probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but let's say you have some custom code, you can set something in the context, and you can use it much later in the same context. And actually, that's how DNN, for example, stores the portal settings. Puts it in the context at the beginning of a request, and everybody takes it from the context. So maybe if you write context column portal or portal ID or portal settings. Yeah, just returns the object as a string, and that's its representation.
And so out of curiosity, context.
Yeah, it looks like the same thing. Just aliases.
Just making sure it's evaluating there for me. So is it possible that all three of these things are the same thing?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Just out of curiosity, since we're talking about this, what is the scope of that context? Like when, how do I put it? How is it cached? Is it per session, per user, globally, every
It's per
time
request.
the IIS is reset?
No, it's just per request. So an HTTP request, when, for example, you load a page, that's a request. It exists from the beginning until the end of the request. Afterwards, it doesn't exist anymore.
So that's returning a value. Are we providing any way to set the value?
I don't think we do. So again, it was more useful where maybe you'd have different components. Like for example, on a DNN page, if you have a module from one vendor and another module from one vendor, and then an action form, let's say, and those vendors put something in the context, you can get it in action form with these tokens.
So probably less of a use case as we're moving on into Plankton app. Okay.
I don't think I felt the need for it in a long time. But I think our code also uses it. And I remember having a piece of code that shows everything that's in the context, a debugging function, but I don't know where it is. You know, Costin, do you remember it?
Yeah, I actually built it as an effort to figure out how to write my own actions. I built an action that would iterate through the context and dump it out as JSON. So that's, I think I talked about that at one point as a debugging function that I worked through here in Campfire.
Yeah, you did talk about it, Dale.
So
Yes,
Dale,
I did. I remember that.
what you were doing was essentially looping through the context items and trying to get the list of what's in there. Is that what you were doing?
Yep.
Okay.
And I made it, the result of that delivered back as a JSON context variable. So then you can open up you can use that JSON with a list, for example, to loop through it and do things with it. So yeah, I built that action. If there's interest, I could be happy to go back through it. But yep. Again, that was a learning experience for me. So it's not like it's the prettiest code in the world, but it did get the job done. All right, we are on our last 5 minutes. If there's a topic that anybody else has been hesitant to bring up, now is the time.
Patrick just told me that before I joined, there was a question about IIS management in Docker. Just to come back to that,
Yes.
I talked with my colleagues, and we plan to do that in the future, probably near future, next month or so, to add the possibility to manage the site in IIS when you are running in Docker. But keep in mind that on restart, those settings might not be preserved on Docker restart. I mean, it's not persistent. Those settings are stored in the Windows folder, which we are not sharing on the host disk. We only share the host disk with the site files and the database for persistence. Any other things written in the system inside Docker will not be preserved on restart.
But the settings would be, they would be on the file system. Sorry.
Yes, the
Maybe
file
I can-
system inside Docker. Maybe if I can make a configuration file or something where to store those as well, but I will need to look into it properly.
Okay, well, that's good to know. That was certainly raised as a concern.
Yeah, it's a continuous improvement on Docker right now, so we're open to suggestions and we'll see what we can do, what can be accomplished and what not.
All right. With that, I'm going to call it a full episode. Thank you for coming today to Low-Code Campfire. We'll do it again next Friday. It's the same hour. We are about to drop into our Afterglow segment, so if you want to hang around, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we will see you next week.